The smell of lilies and damp earth was still clinging to my suit, a sickening perfume I knew I'd never wash out. 2 hours. That's how long we had been home after the funeral. 2 hours of silence in a house that suddenly felt too big, too empty, too dead. I was staring at the space where his small shoes used to sit by the door when the phone rang. It was his teacher, Miss Albright, and her voice wasn't offering sympathy. It was raw, urgent, demanding that I meet her immediately at the deserted elementary school. I didn't know why I went. Maybe I just needed a distraction from the crushing reality that my son, Toby, was gone forever. But when I opened the door to his empty classroom, she wasn't alone. Someone was waiting there. Someone small, draped in shadow, sitting at Toby's tiny desk. And when that person finally looked up, the truth of who they were didn't just hurt me. It destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, and the tragedy that had just taken my boy. I was finally facing the secret I had been running from for years, and it was waiting for me, right there, 2 hours after the funeral. Welcome to Voice of Alicia, where stories breathe, emotions speak, and every word paints a world of its own. Close your eyes, relax your mind, and step into a story crafted just for you. The smell of lilies and damp earth was still clinging to my clothes, a sickening perfume I knew I'd never wash out. The funeral was over. The casket, a polished mahogany box that suddenly felt far too big for my small son, had been lowered into the ground. It was one of those cold, gray October days where the sky just sits on your shoulders, heavy and unforgiving. I remember standing by the oak tree in the cemetery, watching the gravediggers begin their work, feeling a cold, hollow space where my heart used to be. My son, 6-year-old Toby, was gone. A sudden, cruel accident, a brief, terrifying stop in time that had stolen him from us. We drove home in silence. My wife, Sarah, sat beside me, her knuckles white against the black fabric of her dress. The house felt like a museum of loss. Every toy, every crayon drawing taped to the fridge was a fresh wound. We sat in the living room, surrounded by untouched casseroles and the silence of a life that would never loud again. 2 hours. That's how long we had been home. 2 hours of staring at a television that wasn't on. 2 hours of the world spinning on without our boy. Then the phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, thinking it was probably someone from the church, another well-meaning call that would only tear the scab off the grief. Sarah nodded weakly, urging me to answer. "Hello?" My voice was rough, barely a whisper. "Mr. Davies? This is Miss Albright, Toby's kindergarten teacher." My stomach dropped. I hadn't seen Miss Albright at the service. She was a gentle, soft-spoken woman with silver hair who adored Toby. I could hear the tremor in her voice, but there was something else, too, a brittle edge of urgency that didn't fit with a condolence call. "Thank you for calling, Miss Albright. It was a beautiful service." "Yes, I'm so sorry, Mr. Davies. I couldn't be there. Listen, I need to talk to you. I'm calling from Toby's school. I'm still here." "The school?" I frowned. "Why are you there so late?" Her voice dropped, becoming a low, tight sound, like a secret being forced out. "I was clearing out his desk, just collecting his things for you, and I found something I need you to come and see, right now." I looked at Sarah. The request was strange. Couldn't she just tell me over the phone? Couldn't she wait until tomorrow? But the tone in her voice, that raw, unshakable need, told me this wasn't about a missing lunchbox or a permission slip. "Miss Albright, we just got back from the cemetery. Can this wait?" No, it can't. I promise you, Mr. Davies, this changes everything. I need you here, immediately. And please, please don't tell anyone about this call. I didn't know why, but I believed her. That desperate sincerity cut through the fog of my grief. I told Sarah I needed to run out for a minute, that the funeral director had forgotten a document. She was too exhausted to argue. I grabbed my coat and drove. The school, Northwood Elementary, was deserted. The parking lot was empty, and the flagpole stood stiffly against the darkening sky. I went to the main entrance. The door was unlocked, another detail that struck me as odd. The hallway was dimly lit. The air smelled of disinfectant and old paper. Toby's classroom, room 104, was at the end of the hall. I saw a thin line of light under the door. I pushed it open slowly. Miss Albright was standing by Toby's small desk, her back to me. She was holding a worn blue backpack, Toby's backpack, but there was a figure seated in one of the little wooden chairs, facing the whiteboard. It was a person I didn't know. They were slight, draped in a dark hooded sweatshirt, their face obscured by shadow and the angle of their head. They were sitting at one of the tiny desks, knees nearly touching their chin, looking for all the world like a misplaced child. I stopped dead in the doorway. Miss Albright? Who is this? The teacher didn't turn around. Her voice, when she spoke, was flat and devoid of warmth. I told you I found something, Mr. Davies. The person in the chair slowly lowered their head and turned toward me. The destruction wasn't immediate, like a bomb. It was slow, agonizing, like watching an iceberg shatter. It wasn't a stranger. Not exactly. It was Toby. I stared. My brain couldn't process the image. The small, familiar frame. The dusty blonde hair peeking out from under the hood. The small, nervous hands clenching a piece of paper. But it wasn't Toby. The face, when it came into the light, was older, etched with a profound, terrifying weariness. This person was maybe 9 or 10 years old, but the eyes, those green eyes, the exact shade of emerald I'd watched grow up for 6 years, were undeniably his. Mr. Davies, Miss Albright began, her voice now dangerously low. A few weeks ago, Toby started telling me stories. Stories about a big sister, a sister who lived somewhere else. I thought it was make-believe. Children do that. She walked over to the seated figure and gently pulled the hood back. My breath hitched. There was a small, unmistakable birthmark just above the left eyebrow, a faded caramel smudge. Toby had the exact same mark. The seated figure, this older, small boy, whispered a name I hadn't heard in years. Daddy. The truth slammed into me with the force of a wrecking ball. Before Sarah and I met, years ago, I had a brief, messy relationship with a woman named Claire. It ended badly. When she moved away, she'd been pregnant. She promised me she terminated the pregnancy. I was young and scared, and I let her lie convince me. I never pursued it. I buried it. This, Miss Albright said, holding up the blue backpack, was what I found in Toby's desk. It wasn't a note to Santa, Mr. Davies. It was a note from this boy, who Toby called his older brother. It was dated last week, saying he was waiting for Toby by the old oak tree after school. She placed the piece of paper in my hand. It was a crude drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands, standing next to an oak tree. Underneath, Toby's barely formed handwriting read, "My bestest brother, Alex." Alex ran away from his foster home last week, Miss Albright explained, her eyes full of judgment and pity. He walked across the state. He found Toby's school. He was waiting here, in the cold, for his little brother to show him where he lived. This boy, Alex, My unknown son had come looking for his family. He had been close, so close. And Toby, my sweet, loyal Toby, had been trying to keep this secret, trying to arrange a meeting between his two worlds. Toby must have been so afraid to tell us. The accident. Toby had been crossing the street away from our house, a route he never took. He was heading towards the old oak tree, the meeting spot he had drawn with his brother. He was going to meet Alex. I looked at the boy, my son, Alex, sitting hunched and heartbroken in the chair. He had tracked his father and little brother down, only to arrive at the terrible realization: the little brother who had found him, the only anchor in his desperate life, was gone. Alex had been at the cemetery. He had seen the small crowd, the small casket. He knew. He was waiting for me here, at Toby's school, because it was the only safe place he knew in the world, the only place connected to the family he had lost twice. I dropped to my knees, the floor cold beneath me. I didn't reach for him. I just wept. Tears for Toby, tears for the selfish, terrified boy I had been, and tears for the young, weary boy in front of me whose life I had destroyed twice, once by abandonment and now by a silence that led to a tragedy. Alex slid off the chair, his movements stiff. He walked the few feet over to me, not with the confidence of a child, but with the cautious, practiced approach of someone used to being hurt. He didn't hug me. He just held up the small, crumpled drawing. "Toby," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Toby told me you were brave." That was the moment I shattered. I reached out and pulled my oldest son into my arms. He was thin, shaking, and smelled like road dust and fear. Miss Albright stood watching us, the silent, terrifying judge of my past. She hadn't called me to console me. She had called me to confront me with the truth. She was the one who destroyed me, not with malice, but by forcing me to face the person I was, the life I had hidden, and the devastating, unimaginable cost of my secret. The funeral was over, but the true reckoning, the terrifying, impossible task of rebuilding a family out of the dust and pain of two boys, had just begun. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this story was only just starting. Thank you for spending your time with Alicia. If this story moved you, let your support be felt. Like, share, and subscribe. Your presence inspires the next tale. Until our voices meet again, stay calm, stay curious, and keep dreaming.